As a brakeman for the railroad, Joe Kramer never worked long on any one line. Whenever he got bored with the route he was working, he would ask for a different run. Then he would hitch a ride on the caboose to the starting point of the new job. So it wasn't unusual that Kramer was bumming a ride on one cold, rainy spring night. As the caboose lurched along, he waited for the on-duty brakeman, an old friend of his, to come back from inspecting the cars. What a miserable night, he thought as he peered out of the window at the pelting rain. He pictured his friend climbing over the tops of the swaying cars, and he was glad to be safe inside the caboose. Kramer was slowly nodding off to sleep when suddenly the train jolted violently, throwing him to the floor of the caboose. A washout, he thought. The engines hit a washout, and I bet the whole train is derailed. Grabbing a lantern and climbing out of the tilted caboose, Kramer heard the screams and cries of the passengers, but all he thought of was his friend. He searched frantically along the tracks. What he found exceeded his worst fears. Lying between two cars were the grisly remains of his friend's headless body. Kramer and the crew picked up the body and placed it in the baggage car, covering it with a blanket. They returned to the tracks and searched until dawn, but they did not succeed in finding the man's head. It was a long time before Kramer felt at peace again. But despite the horrible experience, he wasn't tempted to quit the railroad. Trains had always been his love. Eventually, he became a fireman, and later he was promoted to engineer. Happy in his new job, he nonetheless tried to avoid taking assignments where his friend had met his terrible fate. But engineers are not as free as brakemen to take only the jobs they'd like. Despite his best efforts, the time came when Kramer was forced to make the run. Reluctantly, he prepared the engine and picked his crew. They would leave that night at 8. It was a chilly, rainy evening, much like the night nearly 20 years before that Kramer remembered so well. All went smoothly for a couple of hours, but as the train approached the curve where the fatal washout had been, the engineer glimpsed a faint red light in the distance. Kramer hit the brakes, and the freight train screeched to a halt. He told the fireman to go out for a look. Kramer was puzzled when the fireman returned, saying no light was to be seen. I'll have to look for myself, he decided. Sure enough, as he jumped down to the track, he distinctly saw a red light swaying in the distance. Skipping from tie to tie, his own white lantern swinging by his side, Kramer moved forward toward the red light. Soon he could tell it was an old-style, red-globed lantern. It faintly lit up the lower part of a man's body, dressed in the regulation blue overalls of a brakeman. "What's wrong?" yelled Kramer as he approached the brakeman. Getting no answer, he shouted again. But the dimly lit figure only moved away from him further down the track. Kramer followed, moving his feet uncertainly across the uneven tracks. He tried to keep his eyes focused on the shadowy form in the rain, but it kept slipping out of sight. Then, suddenly, it would reappear just ahead, An eerie feeling came over Kramer as he followed the figure around the very curve where his friend had died. Rounding the sharp bend, he froze in horror. Covering the tracks was a pile of earth and rocks, the worst washout he had ever seen. And standing atop it was the figure with the red lantern. But now, the light was held high by an outstretched arm. And Kramer sensed the truth in the instant before he looked. With a sickened feeling, he saw that the figure had no head, and in another instant, the ghostly brakeman was gone. Joe Kramer was an engineer for more than 15 years after that, but he never accepted another assignment on that run. Younger engineers scoffed when they were told that Kramer believed that he was saved from disaster by a ghost. But when Kramer died one cool, wet night in the spring, some say that you could see two shadowy figures with red lanterns walking up and down the tracks on that fateful curve. And one of the figures, they say, was headless. The wire mesh fence surrounding the dingy green house on the far edge of town had a gate, and it was locked. "Anybody home?" yelled Bradley from the gravel berm of the road. Inside the house, a dog barked. Then a second started barking, a third and a fourth. Suddenly, the house exploded and shook with barking. 20, maybe 30, dogs filled the air with their howls, yelps, and woofs. Bradley's knuckles whitened as he gripped the gate. "Anybody home?" he yelled again. The yard inside the fence was barren. Not a blade of grass could be seen anywhere. As the hot sun baked the red clay, Bradley thought the yard looked like a giant brick. The visitor waited another few moments at the gate. Still no one came to the door of the house. The deafening sound of the dogs would certainly have aroused anyone inside, and Bradley had no intention of jumping the fence to knock on the door. But just as he was turning to leave, the door cracked open, and an old man slipped outside. Hunched over, he slowly shuffled toward the gate. The dogs hurled themselves against the house's metal door in an effort to get out. The man approached, seemingly unaware of the fury behind him. When he reached the gate, the old man stopped and stared at Bradley, his bleary eyes full of curiosity and irritation. For a moment, Bradley stared back. So this is the famous dog man, he thought. "Sir," said Bradley, "I'm here on behalf of the county. According to our local laws, a homeowner can have no more than 3 dogs living in a single-family residence. It's obvious that you have far more than that." He handed the old man a paper. "This is a court order telling you to dispose of your extra dogs within 30 days. Otherwise, we will have to come back and take them away ourselves." The old man continued to stare at Bradley, as if he didn't understand a word. "Listen, mister," Do you know what I just said? You gotta get rid of these dogs. People are complaining. As if they knew what was going on, the dogs began barking even more loudly. Flashes of teeth and fur appeared at the bottom of the front room window. But still, the dog man did not respond. Bradley was disgusted, and more than a little unnerved. "Look," he said, "I've given you the court order. I'll be back in 30 days. As he turned to walk back to the police car, Bradley thought he heard the old man mumble, "You'll be sorry." It was only a couple of days later that the police got a report of a dog having bitten a child. Bradley was assigned to investigate. The stray dog had disappeared, so the little girl was going to have to undergo rabies shots. Bradley felt sorry for the child. He listened closely to her story, hoping it would help him to find the animal. Apparently, the dog had been very friendly to the child. In fact, she said it seemed like the dog wanted her to follow it. As the girl and the dog had neared the edge of town, the dog suddenly turned to her, bit her hand, and tried to drag her along. Luckily, a passing car had stopped and the driver had scared the animal away by hitting it with a tire iron. Bradley noted that the attack had occurred only a short distance from the dogman's house. Through the afternoon, the case stayed uneasily on Bradley's mind. He kept thinking of the fact that a number of children had been reported missing in recent weeks, and all of them had been from the same side of town. The little girl had spoken of being lured by the dog. So Bradley decided to pay the dogman another visit. It was nighttime when he pulled his car up alongside the road a little way from the green house. For some reason, Bradley felt it best not to let the dogs and their master know he was coming. As he walked up the gravel road, he noticed the beam of a flashlight in the dogman's backyard. Bradley stopped and watched intently. The old man had a bag and a shovel in hand. As Bradley watched, the dogman dropped the bag and started digging into the hard clay, making a small hole. Then he dumped the contents of the bag into the hole and covered it over again, packing down the earth. Bradley walked back to his car and got inside. "I'll just wait until everyone's asleep," he thought, "and then I'll go check out that hole." A couple of hours later, Bradley was inside the fence by the freshly dug earth. He dug at the hole with a small camping shovel he kept in the cruiser. In just a few moments, he hit something hard. Turning on his flashlight, he reached into the hole and pulled out what he thought was a large stone. Shaking the dirt off of it, he stared in horror. It was a child's skull. Suddenly, Bradley heard a low growl, then a dog's barking. He had time only to glimpse a pair of yellow-green eyes and a row of fangs before those teeth sank into his upraised arm. He wrestled with the dog, rolling and kicking, but the vicious dog kept tearing at his arm. Reaching down with his free hand, he was finally able to pull his gun from its holster at his waist. Aiming as best as he could as he writhed to free himself, he shot. The animal collapsed, fatally wounded. Bradley ran for the fence. By this time, all the dogs in the house were in an uproar. They came streaming from the back door, nearly catching the policeman as he scrambled over the fence. Yelping and howling, they leapt in vain at the spot where Bradley had just disappeared. But suddenly, the pack fell silent. The old man was shuffling out of the house, holding a rifle. Peering over the fence, he pointed the weapon at Bradley, who lay sprawled on the ground. "I said you'd be sorry," said the dog man menacingly. "Now you've discovered our little secret, and we can't have you telling anyone about it." The dog man cocked the gun. Its barrel trembled only inches from Bradley's head. "When my money ran out, I couldn't buy food for my babies," he continued. "And about that time a little boy wandered into our yard. Well, my babies were so hungry. What else could they do? What a juicy morsel that boy must have been. Now my babies won't eat anything else, so I send them out to get their own food." Bradley stared at the old man in disbelief. Fear for his life gave way to loathing of this man. The dog man's eyes narrowed, his shoulders hunched, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "You had to come back and find us out," he went on. "I bury the bones in my yard, so no one will know. I told you you'd be sorry." As the old man's gnarled finger twitched on the trigger, Bradley jerked into action. Rolling violently out of the line of fire, he came up firing his own revolver. The bullet found its mark in the dog man's chest. In seconds, the dogs were viciously tearing apart their old master's body.